Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, comedian, filmmaker, gang member, maybe from the present, kind of from the past. I'm wearing some type of leather. Is it modern? Is it throwback? I don't know. Let's do some singing and hit stuff.
That is a very long description for yourself there, Jason.
I just pitched the whole movie, baby.
You did. You sort of did. And that is related to our movie for this episode. This season, we've been talking about the films of 1984. And in this episode, we are talking about the somewhat baffling flop, Streets of Fire. It is our flop episode. And we're covering, it's a movie that it was a box office failure, but I think we could have put this in our cult classic episode as well, because this movie has certainly engendered quite a cult following, unlike some of the big flops that we've talked about in past seasons where no one really likes them. Over the years, this movie has built up quite an audience, but at the time it was released, was definitely one of the biggest failures of 1984 from Walter Hill. So it's an interesting film, certainly.
We often talk about midnight movies, Josh, and Dave before we got on was saying, Dave will tell you why he's not a fan of it, but he thought if he saw it with an audience in the theater on like a midnight showing, it might change things. I mean, this could totally be like a Rocky Horror thing. We could all dress up. I could be Ellen Aim. You could be Tom Cody. What fun we would have, guys.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is a movie that has been shown in that context over the years because it absolutely fits in that realm. It was, however, not successful when it came out. It grossed $8.1 million at the box office on its budget of $14.5 million, although this is another movie where the actual budget may have been larger because it kind of ballooned over the course of production, but those are the official figures that I found, which are still not good.
When I was researching it, Josh, I think it went almost double that budget. It went about 14 million over from what I read.
Yeah, so certainly not a success from the standpoint of the studio or anyone involved, really. I was also nominated, as we've talked about, the possibly suspect Razzie Awards, but it was nominated for a Worst Supporting Actress Award for Diane Lane as Ellen Aim, as you mentioned, who is the rock singer who gets kidnapped by the biker gang and sort of sets off the entire plot of this movie, such as it is.
That just seems unnecessary. I mean, I don't know. You think she deserved a Razzie Award nomination for this?
No, I don't. I mean, and as we've talked about numerous times related to the Razzies, I think what they do is less about finding the actual worst and is more about kind of piggybacking on the publicity of movies like this that have failed and using that
pile on.
Yeah, exactly. So
well, Josh, it's too bad the Oscars didn't pile on to the accolades from the Sitges Film Festival, where Amy Madigan won Best Actress.
And that's a prestigious, that's a genre film festival. We talked about that festival in our Halloween episode on Trick or Treat. I believe it was one of the festivals where that movie was promoted and received some attention. And that festival still exists and is one of the most prestigious genre festivals. So no need to be dismissive of Sitges or Sitges. I don't even know how you pronounce that.
Well, then who's really dismissive? Maybe you should learn how to pronounce it.
Maybe I should. Critical reaction to this movie seems to have been largely negative, but not entirely negative. And I think even the negative responses from critics were more like confused than angry, let's say. Because I think in part because Walter Hill had engendered a lot of goodwill with the previous movies that he had made, and critics were inclined to like the new Walter Hill movie and were sort of perplexed when they didn't. But Roger Ebert actually was fairly positive, and he does seem at times in his review to sort of be trying to convince himself that he liked it. He says, Walter Hill's Streets of Fire begins by telling us it's a, quote, rock and roll fable from another time, another place. The movie is right on the rock and roll, but the alternative time and place are mysteriously convincing, especially if, like me, you believe the most beautiful post-war American cars were Studebakers. Hill likes characters who are broadly symbolic. He occasionally gives us people who are individuals, but mostly he likes characters who stand tall and represent good or evil and settle the matters of the universe with unlimited violence. That's what we get this time. What we also get is some interesting atmosphere, which owes a lot to the art direction and the background musical score by Ry Cooder. And that's kind of just some little excerpts there. I always enjoy in the Ebert reviews when you get a glimpse into Ebert's weird personal interests, like Studebakers. So
yeah, I know, Josh. As we know, you also like when he talks about what a ladies' man he used to be. So are you picturing Ebert taking out some dames in his Studebakers right now in the, post-war Chicago or something?
I wasn't, but now I am. And I think that is quite a picture right there.
Where's that movie? I want to see that movie.
Yeah. Where's the Roger Ebert biopic that's mostly devoted to his early days as a ladies' man?
As a playboy.
Yes.
So, Josh, I mean, obviously we know they did film some of this in Chicago and all of those kind of lifted train kind of stations, and the architecture of it is based on it. So I can see Ebert's affinity for it, even if he didn't like anything else. But as you said, it does sound like he liked a few of the elements of it. Ry Cooder, you mentioned, who's playing a big part in 1984 as we go forward.
He is indeed, and yes, he's only one of them. I mean, the lineup of musicians that contributed to this movie is quite impressive, and he's only one of them. And Ebert did mention in another part of the review that I didn't quote, he did specifically mention the Chicago train, so he's a diehard Chicago guy, certainly. Janet Maslin in the New York Times is one who seems to want to give Walter Hill credit, but is unable to. She says, if Walter Hill has directed any of the players in Streets of Fire, his self-proclaimed rock and roll fable, to do anything but talk tough and look hot, it doesn't show on the screen. Sexy posturing is what Streets of Fire is about. And if it were sexier or less humorless, it might really work. Mr. Hill has made a stimulating but finally exhausting exercise in thrill-seeking. Streets of Fire has a lot more to do with desperado lore than with rock and roll, though it is accompanied by a loud and over-persistent score. Visually, Streets of Fire lies somewhere between The Wild One and Blade Runner, as a lot of 1950s influenced new wavers in black leather race through decaying urban settings that have a bleak, nocturnal, faintly futuristic beauty. Mr. Hill is a superb stylist, and the gap between the visual effects and their narrative idiocy is enough to make you weep. As in The Warriors, he has constructed a great-looking but essentially pointless pop parable. And she went on in other sections to really hammer home how much she hated the music.
Let me ask you something, Maslin. What you know about these streets? So at one point, Josh, she said less humorless, so more humor? Is that what?
Yeah, I think she wanted it to be sexier and funnier, is what she's trying to say.
I thought there was a lot of fun comedy in this, intentional or not. Like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It was funny to me. Yeah. So basically, the theme is that we're getting is he can put together a really slick, awesome looking movie, but they don't like the stories. Is that kind of what I most of the criticism is? I think that's the idea. Not only the story, but again, from Maslin's perspective, the music she really didn't like and the acting. I wonder, there's so many musicals in 1984 that we've kind of discussed when planning this season. It'll be interesting to see what Janet Maslin says about some of the other musical pictures of the year. Yeah, and to me, it seems like it's less about the placement of music in the structure of the movie, and more that she just really doesn't like the music itself. Right, and that's a little unfair because you don't have to like a certain type of music to recognize its effectiveness in a film. Right, I agree. And I think there's a lot of times, for me at least, watching a movie that is heavily influenced or that is heavily driven by music,
And I wouldn't really want to listen to that music on its own, but it enhances the experience of the movie and it is used well within the context of that. And I think that's the case here, that the music is used quite well. She also wasn't the only one to compare this movie to Blade Runner, although I think I didn't quote the other section in another review, but that came up a couple times.
Yeah, you said, The Wild One meets Blade Runner. Couldn't you just sell this movie on that pitch alone? Like, how great does that sound?
Right, it sounds great, and I mean, as Walter Hill and his partners in writing and producing did sell this movie, and in quite possibly on a pitch like that. I mean, this is a movie that the studio was very much behind until it suddenly failed. So I think the pitch for this movie does sound great. You're absolutely right on that. And finally, Gary Arnold in the Washington Post was another one who was disappointed in Walter Hill. He said, "The disappointing thing about Streets of Fire is that it can't deliver on the promise of a tangy, sexy evening of stimulation. The failure is aggravated by the exorbitant scale of the production, which seems much too lavish for an atmosphere of B-movie squalor. Not that one can work up a major case of disappointment about such a harmless attraction, but even that hesitancy is a clue to what's gone wrong. Harmless is a strange word to find yourself applying to a movie directed by Walter Hill." And it weirdly, he wrote a very long review, as he often does, Gary Arnold, and he seems to have read the script before seeing the movie for some reason, and just talked about how disappointing the execution was. So he actually liked the story and was complaining in part about the sort of weird 50s/80s pastiche that to me is one of the most distinctive things about this movie.
Yeah, what the heck, bro? You're like, hey, this movie looks too good or too expensive, It
Right.
should look more, cheaper and B-movie like, I love the look of the movie, and it's Andrew Laszlo, the cinematographer, who was also the cinematographer on The Warriors, which Walter Hill's most famous movie, and then First Blood and Newsies, to name a few other. I mean, he crushed this thing, dude.
Yeah, it looks great. I think the cinematography, the production design, which was a huge undertaking for this film and a huge headache, but it pays off. And I think the editing too, and there's a quote somewhere, I think on the Wikipedia, where Walter Hill talked about how he didn't realize how difficult it would be to shoot musical numbers, which was something he'd never done before. But I think that comes off really well. And there's some really creative like freeze frames and edits and stuff during the musical numbers. So I'm with, well, maybe not with Maslin because she didn't like the music, but I definitely think the way that this movie falls apart is in the story, is in the writing, the story, the dialogue, and also in a lot of the acting. I think the performers aren't quite, or not enough of the performers are charismatic enough to pull this off.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. But you mentioned the production designer. That's John Vallone. Dave, if you want to look up the editor's name, I don't have that in front of me. But yeah, I mean, look, it's carried by the music and the look. There is some performances that don't hold up, as you said. But the editing, you were talking about Larry Gross, the co-writer, was like, every day that they were in the editing room, it just started to look and feel better, and they really were able to shape something out of it. So that's interesting. That's where movies are made, in the editing room. So
yeah, and I think this movie comes across that way, that it's just got so much stuff thrown into it that, and it's not a long movie. It's a 90-minute, it's a tight film, and the editing has got to be where they really like fit all that stuff together, or don't. I mean, this movie certainly is not a full-on success by any stretch of the imagination. But I think with so many weird elements, the fact that it holds together at all is kind of impressive.
I mean, Walter Hill's a pro, man. He's not going to just make something that is just doesn't work at all. He knows how to put a movie together.
Yeah, it seems that way. Maybe less so later in his career, but that's a topic for later. Do you have any other background info on this you want to share, Jason?
I mean, Josh, of course, as you know, it was named after a Bruce Springsteen song.
Of course,
that, right?
Yes.
And then, as I was telling Dave, that was the whole big thing at the end, is that they wanted Ellen Aim to sing Streets of Fire from the Darkness on the Edge of Town album. And Bruce gave him the rights to the music, but not for another performer to sing it. So Jim Steinman wrote "Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young" in like 2 days, which is a great '80s anthem. You know, I love Springsteen, but I also love "Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young." So
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not familiar with that Springsteen song, but I don't honestly, I can't imagine it having been like a better closing anthem for this movie.
it wouldn't have fit. It doesn't make sense because Streets of Fire is, you know, maybe would fit better in The Warriors, where it's like kind of these grody, you know, street racers and, you know, the life that they lead and everything. But, you know, the spirit of Streets of Fire, the movie is less about kind of, I mean, there's the gang warfare, but really Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young is the theme, that like the music kind of can overtake whatever is bad going on in this city, in this life, in this world, and propel you to dreams and greater heights, Josh.
Yes. And this movie is about, I mean, is this something I didn't notice when watching it, but reading the background, where Walter Hill really wanted it to be about sort of being young, and he didn't cast any actors over 30. So there are no old people in this weird fictional city, or even middle-aged people. So certainly the idea of youth is something that they're trying to capture here. And that's what that song is all about. Had you seen this one before, Jason?
No, I had never seen it, Josh. How about you?
No, I hadn't either. And as we'll also get to later, I had, however, seen the sort of unofficial sequel, Road to Hell, directed by Albert Pune, which is a whole other weird project. And when I watched that movie at a film festival, I had never even heard of this movie. So it was very confusing to watch. And that was sort of how I became aware of this. But I had not gotten to it, although it's the kind of thing that I probably would have wanted to see in that sort of midnight movie cult realm. I enjoy checking that stuff out, so I was glad to get a chance to see it. And Dave, you watched it a little while ago, is that right?
Yeah, I watched it like a month ago for a guest appearance on the Binge Movies podcast. Shout out to those guys. But I'd also been to that Road to Hell premiere that you were at, and hadn't heard of this at the time either. So it was weird to see a sequel to something I didn't know existed, but a lot of people love.
And yeah. Dave, was at the point of the Binge Movies episode, was it like, hey, here's a movie that you might not know that doesn't necessarily have a lot of acclaim, but you should really check it out?
Yeah, it was 5 of those that we had to binge and then rank. So
where did this one rank on your top 5 in that episode?
I think it was dead center at number 3 for me. I'd have to dig up my notes.
What else was on there?
Dead Heat, which I absolutely loved, and Deadly Friend, the Wes Craven movie, and then Short Circuit, which I really did not like. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, Midnight Mile, another 80s movie.
Yeah, those are all kind of oddball 80s movies, I think. So interesting list.
Yeah.
Well, we will get more into those thoughts when we come back in a moment and talk about our general impressions of Streets of Fire. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1984, we're talking about the biggest flop of the year, or at least one of the big flops of the year, is Walter Hill's Streets of Fire. And this is one of those movies where watching it, you can see why it did not do well at the box office. Whether you like it or not, this is not a movie that's going to be widely loved, I think.
Yet Blade Runner was.
Well, even Blade Runner, I think, took a while to become the success and the classic that it has become. You know, and Blade Runner had a lot of behind the scenes clashes, and there's multiple cuts of Blade Runner, and I don't think it's a clear success necessarily. But are you trying to trash Blade Runner? Is that what you're doing there, Justin?
No, I'm trying to give Streets of Fire the credit it deserves as a modern masterpiece, Josh.
Wow. Okay.
I'm not necessarily saying it's a masterpiece, but it's awesome, and I loved it. And when we go through movies on Awesome Movie Year, when you discover these little gems that you never knew, like, it's always fun to watch a good movie, but it's also fun to watch something you're like, whoa, this wasn't supposed to be this enjoyable. You know, there's So Bad It's Bad and So Bad It's Good. This definitely falls into the latter, but it's not just so bad it's good. It's so technically excellent along with the bad stuff that you're like, what am I not supposed to enjoy here? Like, this dude is just blowing up motorcycles with the firebombing gun or something. And now Diane Lane is acting like she's Pat Benatar or Bonnie Tyler. And then there's a doo-wop group for no reason. And there's just some cool car chases in this neon futuristic past city. It was like, man, yeah, I'm in on this.
And you didn't even get to Willem Dafoe yet.
Right, and a young Willem Dafoe. So.
And his weird leather overalls that he wears.
That was one of those things that I found interesting, Josh, is that, like, you know, all these people are dressed like kind of like new agey. And then Michael Paré's character is like, hey, I just came from tilling the farm in the 1930s or something like that.
Yeah, you know, it's a bold move to have your character who's meant to be the ultimate badass wear suspenders for the entire movie. I have to give them credit for that.
He looked like he came out of like Hell or High Water or, you know, something, you know.
Yeah.
Some Southern Gothic film.
And Walter Hill has said, and you can see this, where his idea, or one of his ideas behind this movie, was everything that he thought was cool when he was a teenager. He wanted to put all of that into a movie. And he clearly didn't think about whether all of that stuff fit together in any way, but it was just throw it all in.
So that quote is custom cars, kissing in the rain, neon, trains in the night, high-speed pursuit, rumbles, rock stars, motorcycles, jokes in tough situations, leather jackets, and questions of honor. Like, you're the man, Walter Hill. Like, take a bow, bro.
Yeah, it's again, it does feel like in a lot of ways it's this sort of just unfiltered look into his imagination, which is cool. And this is another one of those movies, and we've talked about this a few times, where a filmmaker made a really successful movie and thus was in the position to do basically whatever he wanted. And Walter Hill had just made 48 Hours, and he was able to go into a studio and say, here's my weird ass vision. And they're like, go. You know, and sometimes that works out really well, and sometimes not so much. But I always appreciate being able to see those kinds of movies.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. And I wonder, you know, they're lesser, they're not as produced as much now as they used to be. But, like, you know, I'm looking at this as a film, like you said, that had to find its audience because it's so much all in your face at once. And you could see, like, if you don't go with it right from the beginning, how the next 90 minutes, you know, aren't going to be enjoyable to you. But I got into it right away, man. So you seem to not feel the same way.
I mean, I didn't like it as much as you did, or I didn't enjoy it as much as you did, but I did get into it right away. Actually, the opening, which is the first musical number by Ellen Aim, the Going Nowhere Fast, which was another Jim Steinman composition, which is great. Like, the song is great, and the way that they shoot it is great. And Diane Lane comes on the screen with this great charisma. And I was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. And then Michael Paré shows up. And
he's the weakest part of the movie, and he's the lead. And that's unfortunate. I 100% agree with you. And every Larry Gross quote that I read just trashes him and how he shouldn't have been the star and how he brought the movie down. And, you know, he just really goes out of his way to talk about how bad Michael Paré is. And it's kind of interesting. At one point, they did offer the role to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise was committed to another film at the time. But Tom Cruise, Eric Roberts, Patrick Swayze were the big three that I had read about, all of which would have been better. But Michael Paré, not the best in this one. Although his voice does sound shockingly similar to Jeff Anderson's in Clerks.
It does. I noticed that too. It was very strange. So, I mean, and I think it's not just Michael Paré. I mean, we can pile on him, and that's fair. And this was basically like the beginning and also the pinnacle of his career. Really. And
yeah, he had to run like 84 and 85 with this and the Philadelphia Experiment, right?
Yeah. And then he just he didn't take off the way that they, I'm sure, would have hoped for a discovery like this. But I think it's also the character. He is such this, like, I mean, they want to turn him into this archetypal badass hero. And again, something from the imagination of teenage Walter Hill, or the other thing he talked about where he wanted to make what he thought of as like a comic book movie, but he didn't actually like any comic books. So he just invented his own idea. And I think this definitely feels like a movie that's trying to be a comic book, but was made by somebody who doesn't actually like comic books.
Yeah, but in a way that works, because we've seen movies about people who are experts at comic books, and it's like a love, like you've brought up in past movies, like I think in one of our documentaries you said, the filmmaker was too close to the subject or something like that, and that took it out for you. In this regard, we've seen a lot of great comic book movies by comic book experts, but I kind of think the fact that he knew so little or cared so little and was just like, man, I'm just going to do my thing. Like, his thing is awesome. So, I mean, like, we both agree one of the best things is the way this thing looks. So, and the colors are just pop, like they're great.
Yeah, I agree. It does look great. And I love the idea of this sort of fictional city. It's not set in a real place. I mean, it does open with that sort of another time, another place disclaimer. Right. That's very similar to the galaxy far, far away a long time ago, just the Star Wars thing. And the idea that it just immediately puts you in this other frame of mind. And the fact that some of it was shot on real locations in Chicago and Los Angeles. Some of it was shot on a backlot, and you kind of meld all that together, and it gives you this dreamlike quality of like, where is this? There's the geography of this city seems to change. Like at one point they have to go. So Ellen Aim is kidnapped by the bombers, the gang led by Willem Dafoe, and Tom Cody, who is Michael Paré's character, comes back to town after having been in the military, and he's Ellen Aim's ex-boyfriend, and he's going to go save her, having been hired by her current boyfriend, played by Rick Moranis. And so they've got to go to the Battery, which sounds like it's just another neighborhood in this town, but then it takes them like 10 hours to drive there. And I loved that because I was like, on the one hand, I thought this is a logical inconsistency in this movie. Like they've met at noon and then they arrived at 10 p.m. And how slow does that car really drive? But on the other hand, I loved that because it was like they were traveling through some sort of portal or something. Like it just, rules of logic don't apply here.
Yeah, what I had read was there. So this is Richmond. That's the name of the town.
The Richmond, the Richmond.
And there's five different areas like New York, 5 boroughs. But we only see 3 of them, even though maybe they mentioned all 5. Yeah, and the Battery has its own feel. Like it's the home of rockabilly.
and exploding motorcycles, as you said. Yeah, I love also that this city appears to be like 90% warehouses, which is also awesome. I think Roger Ebert maybe was the one who described it as like Chicago if it had not been gentrified or something. But it doesn't, even if they shot parts in Chicago, it doesn't evoke any particular city. And that's what I like that about it.
Yeah, it's very bombastic and ostentatious. And I guess, I had read that Hill didn't really want to go shoot in Chicago. So they did what they did. And then they built him a whole city on like that back lot, like you said. And it's just its own world. And to me, that's one of the strengths of it. It's like, I'm not exactly, like you mentioned, Willem Dafoe's leather overalls. Like, why is he wearing those? There's no reason.
No one else in the gang wears them.
Right. He's not steampunk. He's not doing any type of glass blowing that I can tell or anything, He's just in them. And it's like it's the battle of the overalls versus the suspenders in the end, and it's doesn't make sense. Rick Moranis is just there to be a dick to Michael Paré the whole time, and again, there's a doo-wop group that's in there for a long period of time. That like what a doo-wop group, and I just liked all of it for some reason, maybe against my better judgment. But hey, man, it was fun.
Yeah, it is fun, and I like that the doo-wop group, and they look very much like the 50s or early 60s singing group, and they've got the way that they're dressed, and they're harmonizing, and they're doing a cappella on the bus that has been stolen as they run from the police. And then in the big final performance, their song is like a total 80s synth pop song. And I did like that, where the concept of this world is like, what if the 50s was the 80s. And or maybe it's what if the 80s was the 50s? But either way, it's that weird, like, out of time kind of feel. So
yeah, out of time's a good description for it. The song you're talking about is I Can Dream About You by Dan Hartman, which charted at number 6, his highest solo piece. And then he wrote Living in America for James Brown. And he wrote Free Ride. Pretty cool song,
Wow.
Edgar Winter,
Yeah.
go on, take a free ride. And he died very young in his mid-40s from AIDS. But pretty talented songwriter, I'd say. Those are 3 very different types of songs.
They are indeed, yeah. And I think that's the thing, again, is that there's so much musical talent involved. I mean, we mentioned Ry Cooder, Jim Steinman, who wrote those 2 amazing songs, Dan Hartman. And then when they go to the Battery, as you said, which is the home of rockabilly, the rockabilly band that's playing there is the Blasters with Dave Alvin, who is a major, like, kind of Americana alt country figure. And that's a great song. The Blue Shadow that they play there is another really catchy song. So I wanted there to be more music. I wished this movie was just like went all in on really actually being a musical. That would have
been cool. That would have been cool. And, Jimmy Iovine was kind of like a musical supervisor. Ry Cooder did a really great job kind of scoring it. And he's very good, as we'll see in the next episode, of kind of picking a thematic song and just kind of pushing it throughout, which is something I like, in films. So yeah, I mean, you got to also mention Fire Incorporated, Josh, because that's Ellen Aim right there,
Right. Well, Fire Incorporated wasn't a real thing. It was just Jim Steinman's made up name for the studio musicians that he used for the Ellen Aim songs. But I don't know.
Bass with Laurie Sargent. That's
there you go.
That's the real kind of. It was her and Holly somebody, I think, for the 2.
Yeah, voices. There were two singers that he kind of combined to make the voice of Ellen Aim. Yeah, I mean, the performance of those songs, everything is really good. And I think Diane Lane, of course, Diane Lane doesn't sing. And I don't think that Diane Lane can sing. But I mean, she gives you the charisma of the rock star. And she was really young. She was 18 when she made this movie. And some of the reviews I read criticized her performance the most. And obviously she was nominated for that Razzie. But I think she really gets that Pat Benatar tough girl rock star thing, like carries that across better than Michael Paré gets you the tough guy persona, I think.
Yeah, she looks like a young, beautiful pop star. And the voices sound somewhere, like you mentioned, Benatar, Bonnie Tyler, and then Patti Smythe from Scandal those were the 3 that just kept popping into my head. And I think it's great that, she was nominated for a Razzie and went on to, shove it right up there. Keisters with a long, successful career, Josh.
Yeah. I mean, in acting wise, well, I guess other than Willem Dafoe, she's maybe the one from the main cast who, went on to the most success and acclaim here.
Amy Madigan had a pretty good, successful career as a supporting player. She's
right.
a working actress. So.
She is, but maybe not as high profile as Diane Lane. And we haven't even mentioned Amy Madigan yet, but her character, McCoy, who's sort of the sidekick to Tom Cody, who is the tough tomboy, obviously a lesbian. I think we can agree on that. She's great.
She's really fun. And that role was originally written as like an out of work dude soldier. And she's like, I want to play that role. And they were like, yeah, that works. So, there's kind of a good interplay with her and McCoy or that Tom Cody that breaks down kind of at the end. And that's kind of a weakness. They, of course, come back together. But, Josh, you said that the 2 biggest successes were Diane Lane and Willem Dafoe, but also in this movie, Michael T. Williamson, Ed Begley Jr., Robert Townsend, Bill Paxton.
Yeah, a lot of, very small parts. Yeah, I mean, I was sort of focusing on the main cast, but that's true. There are a lot of up and coming people in very small. I didn't even notice Ed Begley Jr. I wasn't sure who he played, and I saw his name in the credits, but I totally missed him.
Oh, when they go to the Battery before they get into like that building, that hideout, he's like kind of like that street urchin on top of the building. He's like, you guys know what you. And I thought, like, man, is that Ed Begley Jr.? Because that's a very different part for him.
Gina pointed him out, and I thought she was wrong, and I had to look it up. And yeah, sure enough.
Yeah. He wasn't playing the nerdy mayor of the town or something.
Right, he was doing the exact opposite, which was kind of cool to see. So yeah, and Bill Paxton made the most of all of these movies in the 80s. This and Weird Science, playing this like doofy, like kind of like second or third, male who's just in a few scenes. He really makes the most of these.
Yeah, he's fun. He makes a bigger impression than those other kind of up and comers. Michael T. Williamson and Robert Townsend are both members of the doo-wop group, and the
Sorrells.
the Sorrells, and they all just kind of are one entity. They don't really have any distinctive personalities there. But Bill Paxton certainly makes an impression, and he's fun to watch. And I liked, going back to McCoy and to Amy Madigan, I liked the dynamic, and in a weird way, even though the sort of motivation for the plot is that Tom Cody wants to rescue Ellen Aim, who is his ex-girlfriend that he clearly still has a thing for. The central relationship in this movie is between Tom Cody and McCoy. Yeah. And it's a friendship. She says, "You're not my type." And again, maybe that's some reference to what her sexuality is. But either way, there's no kind of romantic possibility between them. And at the end, when they come together, it's about them like teaming up to have more adventures. And I liked that about it.
I agree. And Josh, in a way, this movie's ahead of its time because I can't really think of a mismatched buddy cop action movie from before this that involves a, male female dynamic, where they're just always at each other's throats.
Right, and where they don't fall in love, where it's not the prelude to a romance. So yeah, I liked that a lot. And again, I think between the sort of butchness of McCoy and what I read as a bit of weird energy between Tom Cody and Raven, Willem Dafoe's character, this is a super gay movie, I think.
I didn't get any of that. I mean, I definitely got McCoy as a lesbian, but where's the Cody?
Well, first of all, Raven, as we've discussed extensively, his wardrobe and his hair. I mean, he's dressed like a gay fetish guy, basically.
I mean, that's kind of stereotyping it, right? He's a fop, certainly.
Well, right. And I'm not saying that this is even anything that the movie is deliberately conveying. But to me, between the look of him and his sort of their obsession with each other. And, I think that's often subtext in movies with the sort of hero and villain who are obsessed with each other, and the like visceral physicality of their final confrontation, which involves them swinging very phallic objects at each other for a very long period of time, and then abandoning those to like get down and dirty with their fists. It seemed a little homoerotic.
No, you're reaching, man. They had these kind of like weird sickle pickaxes. If you ever saw a penis that looked like that, you should send that person right to a doctor, Josh.
I mean, I'm not saying that they were fighting with dildos. I'm just saying that there's some subtext there that I bet I am not the only person.
I'm sure you're not the only one. I disagree, but honestly, if they just banged, I'd have been like, yeah, why not? This is totally cool for this movie.
Right. Yeah,
let's go
I think so. Yeah. And it seemed at times that he was a little more concerned with or a little more focused on Raven than he was on Ellen, who definitely is better off with Rick Moranis, even though he, as you say, is a total dick to Tom Cody the whole time.
Yeah, maybe she'll end up with one of the Sorrells or something like that in the end, or go a totally different way than what we're thinking. But yeah, I don't know, man. I didn't get the homoerotic undertones, although, like I said, McCoy.
Right, that's a more obvious one.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, again, for a movie that was a flop and for a movie that a lot of people panned, we're finding a lot of good in this film.
Yeah, there is. I mean, if we want to be like, I didn't love it. And I think, as I've said, Michael Paré's performance is a big liability here. I think the pacing is also not quite balanced. Like, the story is motivated by rescuing Ellen, and they do that in like the first half hour of the movie. And then the rest of the movie is them just kind of running away from the gang. And it drags a bit. It doesn't have as many exciting, fun set pieces. And I think we get those great musical numbers at the beginning, and then there's a lull before we have those again at the end. And I love that the plot wraps up 10 minutes before the movie ends, and then they're like, let's just have some songs now to end the movie. And I liked that more than the plot. So I felt like that was a shortcoming as well.
Yeah, there was another quote from Larry Gross where he was talking about how Hill wanted to take what he did in The Warriors and like hyperalize it, and all of those criticisms that you just made from a structural standpoint, I think you could make about The Warriors as well. Like in the middle of Act 2, kind of drags for a while before the big endings, and then the ending, it just kind of like peters again. But this has a better ending than The Warriors because it does have the Ella Name song that you just want to sing along to, man.
You do, and it's great. I mean, I was not joking. I love the fact that I think when I was watching it, I was like, okay, so that's the end, but what's left? And then they're just singing. And I thought that was great because that was the best thing about the movie. So, and I haven't seen The Warriors in a while, but I remember not liking that. And I think in part because that is like an acknowledged classic, and I expected it to be some sort of gritty gang movie, and it's just as campy as this movie. And I think that threw me a bit.
Yeah, there is a gang of mimes in The Warriors, and I just can't get around. Like, I can see like all the different styles of gangs in that new version in New York, but I can't see why you would be a mime gang, like why not choose the ones who paint their faces and carry baseball bats around, I don't know. I like The Warriors. I like this movie better than The Warriors, but
yeah,
when you talk about the end, Josh, maybe that's a perfect transition into The Legacy, because we can talk about the 2 sequels that were never made. But of course, we still have to rate it, don't we, before we go to the next segment?
We do have to rate it, Jason. So don't get ahead of yourself here. Do you want to rate this out of 5 pairs of leather overalls?
Sure, Josh, we can do leather overalls.
Are they leather, or are they like vinyl overalls? Maybe
some type of very uncomfortable overalls that you're probably going to sweat and chafe in is what we're
not
rating
very
it out
breathable.
of.
Absolutely,
So,
that is true.
It gets a 3 with a hug wrapped around it for me. 3 pairs of overalls, and I really, really enjoyed it.
I'm going to give it 3 as well, even though I don't think I enjoyed it as much, but I have to give it credit for just swinging for the fences on everything. So
and you're right. That's one of the things that Gross said. He's like, they just, whatever you feel about it, like he went and he took a big swing out there.
Yeah. So I kind of had fun with it. Dave, I think you didn't like it as much as we did.
I mean, I gave it a 2.5, so I'm not too far behind you guys. And like I said, I think I would have had a lot more fun with it with an audience.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it would be an enjoyable movie to watch with a crowd, especially people who are into it, like a Rocky Horror thing where people have seen it a bunch of times and they know what's coming and they're excited about that.
It'll be so much fun as like a midnight movie event. You're right.
Yeah. Before we get to The Legacy, we've got a special contribution from filmmaker Albert Pyun, who is the director of the unofficial sequel, Road to Hell. So let's hear a bit from Albert, and then we'll come back and talk about The Legacy of Streets of Fire. I'm talking to Albert Pyun, director of more than 50 movies, including The Sword and the Sorcerer, Cyborg, and Nemesis. He's also the director of Road to Hell, an unofficial sequel to Streets of Fire, featuring Michael Paré and Deborah Van Valkenburgh reprising their roles. So, Albert, can you tell me, what was it like for you the first time you saw Streets of Fire?
Well, I was working on my second film, Radioactive Dreams, which was a very weird sort of musical action movie, post-apocalyptic, but it had a lot of music in it. And I remember it was such a hard film to edit, and the cutting rooms that we had also had right across the hall from us was Oliver Stone was editing Salvador. So it was a really interesting sort of editorial facility, and there's a lot of, in fact, the 2 people that were working on Radioactive Dreams at that time eventually went to work for Oliver Stone and won Oscars. They edited Born on the 4th of July, and they went on because back then, unlike now. Now everybody work sort of separated from each other. But at that time, everybody worked in like a beehive, I guess, where everybody was kind of jointly or communally working creatively and trying to solve problems that they had in their cuts and stuff. And I was talking to somebody just down the hall. I can't remember what film it was, but they said I was telling them about Radioactive Dreams, and because they, mentioned about they could hear it down the hall, and I said, this sounds like an interesting film. And I said, yeah, but we're having a lot of problems because narratively, to try to tell a story with this much music in it and stuff, it's finding the right balance for tone and stuff for it all to work. And she said, oh, if you want, there's a film that's screening tonight at Universal that you might really enjoy seeing. Walter Hill, the director. And I go, yeah, I love Walter Hill's films. And she said, yeah. So he just directing this film called Streets of Fire. And it's sort of like a rock and roll type thing, music pushing along the narrative and driving the film. And, she said, maybe you might enjoy seeing that. I can get you in there, get you a couple passes, and you can get on the lot tonight and see it. And that'd be great. So I saw it before it was released in the theaters. I think it was the final cut of the film. I saw it at Universal, and it was an invited audience. I don't know, a couple hundred people, and I was just blown away by the film. I mean, what I loved most about Walter Hill on that film was that he kind of let his id go wild and was able to find that right balance between comedy, action, iconic, heroic fantasy, and rock and roll. And I just thought that the editing by Freeman Davies was just remarkable. And so it really charged me up, and it gave me some hope that we could eventually find our way to getting a cut of Radioactive Dreams that would work. And so I was just floored by seeing that film, and it remains probably, it affected me in a way that, like when I saw 2001 Space Odyssey, how that affected me. And, there's certain films that you see that you just know are transitional and really raise the sort of the bar of movie making. And I thought it was a strict genre movie, but it was so much more than a genre movie. And it didn't compromise. And, I thought it was going to be a big hit, but obviously when it came out, I don't think it did very well. And it was really disappointing that it didn't, because that didn't bode well for Radioactive Dreams. So,
did you end up seeing it more times over the course of the subsequent years?
Yeah, well, I saw it one more time because when it first opened, I couldn't go the first night it opened. So I was going to go sometime in a few days. And then I heard that it was going to get yanked out of the theaters because it's doing so poorly. And so I went, and I think I sat through it. Maybe, I started the first screening, was around 10 a.m., and I sat through it all the way until the last screening at 11 p.m. And it was just such I just didn't understand why it got such bad reviews and why audiences didn't get into it. I didn't understand, and I wanted to understand because of Radioactive Dreams. I really wanted to figure out what went wrong and why it would get so much hostility. And it was really a deflating moment. It was the reverse of the first time I saw it at Universal. It was the last time I was seeing it at the theater I was seeing it at. And I remember talking to the manager on my way out, and he said, yeah, it's a real disappointment, that that theater chain had really expected it to be a big hit. And it was even when I went to see it, I think at the normal times that would have been crowded, I think there were only like 2 or 3 people in the audience besides me. So it was really, really, it just didn't, it got rejected totally by the audience. So that was too bad.
Yeah. So what inspired you eventually to decide to make your own sequel?
Well, I just thought that, over the years, I kept thinking, what was it about that movie that just didn't click with audiences? And I was, I had some other ideas about where I sort of saw the characters going beyond the movie, where it was going to go from there. And I was really disappointed that Walter Hill didn't continue the series, because I think his plan was originally to make more films based on it. And in the years in between, when I saw Streets of Fire and Road to Hell, I had met Michael Paré, and I met him he was on a commercial shoot, and I saw him, and we hit it off, and I told him that that I had an idea that I wanted to do with the film, with a follow-up with those characters. And I asked him if he was game, and he said he was. And I knew that I didn't want to go through Universal and get the sequel rights. And I knew that was going to be way beyond our budget, because I self-financed Road to Hell. But I really wanted Road to Hell to be a much darker, sort of more profane version of Streets of Fire. And I thought that maybe, if the audiences were going to reject Streets of Fire, then I might as well give them something, really out of left field and, from my id, in a sense. And and I approached, actually, Michael and I were at a film festival in Spain, and I said to him, "Hey, Michael, do you want to do that film?" And he said, "Sure, send me the script." And Cynthia and I worked on the script, and then I sent it to him, and he loved the script. And I think only about 3 weeks later, we were shooting.
Wow. And do you have any favorite memories from the experience of shooting Road to Hell?
Yeah, well, I loved seeing Michael Paré as that character and in that kind of a role. Because to me, Paré's range is limited, but what he can do really well, he can do really, really well. And I think it's just that if he stretches beyond the limitation, he runs into problems, which is the reason why I think he never became a big star. And yet, I knew that if he could just stick to that, like Tom Cody lane of traffic, that he would be terrific. And I think that was the most exciting thing, was to see him on set as that character. And, with that voice and the look, and I just thought it was really good. And I think all the reviews have been really favorable to him in Road to Hell. I haven't read one bad review of his performance. Whereas, in Streets of Fire, he was, lambasted a little bit by the critics, performance-wise. And so I think that, just that in that time, in the years that followed, I tried to take advantage of the fact that he must be feeling disappointment in where his career went, and because Streets of Fire really represented supposedly like his big break, and he would be breaking out as a star, and the disappointment of that not happening, I try to integrate into Road to Hell, and that's why the character was really dark. It was dealing with a lot of disappointment and that he had within his own life. So it's really pretty honest on that level.
Cool. Well, thank you, Albert. I really appreciate you giving us your insights here on Road to Hell. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1984, we've been talking about the biggest flop of the year, Walter Hill's Streets of Fire, which we all have a bit of affection for, some more than others. And legacy-wise, Jason, you mentioned that initially when they thought that this was going to be a big hit, Walter Hill was already planning a whole trilogy of adventures for Tom Cody that, of course, never happened.
The Far City and Cody's Return. One was supposed to be in the desert and the other was supposed to be in the snow. And we know this had elements of Star Wars, like you said, another galaxy, so in a way that mimics Star Wars and Empire in, different orders and stuff like that. So the other big influences that they mentioned were Flashdance, because that was such a huge hit, like the year before. And the John Hughes movies, because they were really going for that romance right there. So
yeah, I don't know about the John Hughes thing, but yeah, Flashdance wise, also in the scene in the Battery where they go to the Rockabilly Club with the blasters, and there's that woman who's dancing, who's sort of like a stripper. She's the dance double for Jennifer Beals.
Okay,
from
you were from Flashdance. You were talking about the sexuality. I got her as kind of androgynous. Character.
Yes, she is, and of course in a sad reflection of the times, in the Gary Arnold Washington Post review that I quoted in the first segment, I did not quote the section where he complains about her not being feminine enough, and therefore he did not find her sexy. And so, but I think you're right that she is meant to be somewhat androgynous.
I would have loved. I would have loved both of them, but I think him doing a movie in the snow in this world, like what the hell would that have looked like? That would have been amazing.
I don't know if it would have been amazing, because I feel like so much of what is appealing about this movie is the city, is the setting. And to take Tom Cody out of that, and I mean, I guess maybe we would still have McCoy, because she joins him at the end of this movie to go on to further adventures. But we would have lost all the other characters and the rock clubs and so much of what makes this movie good that I don't know how that would have worked out.
Well, you still would have had some type of rock opera in there and those two characters. And, I would have taken my chances with it. Because I'm sure, like we said, you just said you didn't love The Warriors. I totally understand that. But it looks great. It's a great looking movie. And this is a great looking movie, So I think Hill would have done something unique there, and maybe he could have replaced Michael Paré.
Yeah, maybe so. But Michael Paré did, in fact, return for Albert Pune's very not official sequel, Road to Hell, which did get Michael Paré back as Tom Cody, and an actor who we haven't mentioned, Deborah Van Valkenburgh, who plays Tom Cody's sister. And it's been a very long time, and Dave, maybe you remember from having seen Road to Hell, I think because it's not officially a sequel, they never mentioned their actual names, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
But that, of course, is a film. And I think that film, the existence of that film, speaks to how strong a fan following Streets of Fire engendered, is that another filmmaker was so taken with this movie that 25 years later, he decided to make his own sequel, and he got Michael Paré and he got Deborah Van Valkenburgh, and the main musical performance, or the main musical presence in that movie, is a local Vegas musician, and Albert Pune is also based here in Las Vegas. But Roxy Gunn, who is a local Las Vegas musician, plays Ellen Dream, the daughter of Ellen Aim, and performs a bunch of original songs in Road to Hell. And Dave and I saw that movie in a small room full of, what would you say, Dave? Maybe 10 people?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Which
a big room, though.
Okay.
Yeah, with 10 people.
Yeah. It was I believe, the official premiere of that movie, I want to say, possibly the first time it was shown.
Yeah. And I feel, speaking to the whole midnight movie thing, I feel like those 10 people were very raucous during that time. Though.
Yeah, that could have been.
Now, Josh, one thing that you didn't mention is that both Michael Paré and Deborah Van Valkenburgh were available for that film.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, this was really the height of Michael Paré's career. I mean, he works steadily still. And I review a lot of straight to VOD movies these days, and he's all over that shit. So he's certainly working. But Michael Paré is the guy where like if you have, say, $20,000 to make your movie and you're thinking, we need to spend a portion of our budget on an actor that people maybe have heard of, you're going to call Michael Paré.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we mentioned Eric Roberts earlier. He's not far behind.
No, he's definitely, in fact, Michael Paré and Eric Roberts both have appeared in productions by local Las Vegas filmmakers. So
yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, they're working, they're getting it done. Walter Hill is also still working. And Jason, you said, he's a great craftsman. He knows how to put together a movie. I haven't seen really any of his work other than this movie and The Warriors. But I know a lot of his later films, especially in recent years, have very poor reputations. So he kind of also declined quite a bit and made in the 80s and maybe even in the early 90s, made a bunch of other movies that were big-ish studio productions that were flops. And I think eventually the studio stopped giving him money.
Josh, when you're a supernova like Walter Hill, sometimes you just burn out before your time.
Yeah, Supernova, one of the infamous films that Walter Hill made. And I believe Supernova also is possibly, I'm not sure about this, but it may be the last movie that was ever credited to Alan Smithee, which is the pseudonym that directors used to use when they wanted to take their name off of movies, and that stopped being used because people were too familiar with what it meant. And I think it might have been in part because of that movie, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
You're bringing the meat today, buddy. That
thank you.
I mean,
or I'm
Dave
completely
or I
wrong.
can, but it sounds like you could be right, so we can't really call you on it. So it's a good specific piece that you brought there.
It's important to be possibly right about things, or right enough that no one can question whether that's true.
Yeah, or wrong enough, but still believe that you're right. And hey, I'm glad the election's over and we don't have to deal with that anymore.
There you go. No, okay. I'm looking this up, and I was not quite right. Supernova was the first movie where Alan Smithee was not used. It was after Alan Smithee was retired. And so Walter Hill was not able to credit himself as Alan Smithee and instead was credited as Thomas Lee. So
I wonder if he was mad about that.
Like it's a badge of honor in a director's career that at one point you can take your name off of something and be credited as Alan Smithee.
We went to high school with a kid named Thomas Lee, and I accidentally hit him in the head with a discus once, and that would have gone very well in The Warriors. That could have fit perfectly.
Did they use a discus to?
No, but they used baseball bats and a men's room and subway platforms. Why not?
Sure. So obviously, Jason, you've seen The Warriors. Have you seen other Walter Hill movies?
No, I'm going to leave it at those two.
Okay. Yeah. No, I believe I've only seen those. I was trying to think. I may have seen parts of Brewster's Millions, which was the movie he made right after this, like when I was a kid on TV, but I don't entirely remember.
Yeah, and that was a big success. I'd see that. I'd see, what was it, 48 Hours, right? Big
sure.
Success, so he's had a good run. So
yeah, and again, he's still around. His last movie, I think, was in 2016, which was a film with Michelle Rodriguez as a transgender assassin that was very, very heavily trashed by literally everyone.
Yeah, Gary Arnold said she was not sexy enough as either in her male or female identifiers there. So,
it's, I think Gary Arnold's not around anymore, but I could totally sadly see him saying that.
Josh, I liked, what did you think of Larry Gross's quote where he was talking about, like, no matter what you think of the movie, you watch RoboCop, you watch Seven, and you see its influence all over them.
Yeah, I mean, those particular movies aren't the ones that I thought of, but you can definitely see the influence. The movie that I thought of most while watching this was Sin City. Yeah. Which I think is
sure.
It's the stylized, it's the fictional city that sort of represents every urban environment, but not any specific urban environment. And I would think not only with that, but just in general, that Robert Rodriguez has to be hugely influenced by this movie. And the other Rodriguez thing I thought of actually was another flop, the very ill-fated Cirque du Soleil production RUN, which I believe you saw as well, Jason.
And I totally thought about that as being influenced by this. I mean, the story is very influenced, the colors, The cityscape.
Even the motorcycles.
Yeah, the cityscape. You're 100% right on that, Josh.
So I've got one too, and not a movie though. And then I ended up looking this up and found out that I was actually right about this. Street Fighter, Double Dragon, Final Fight, and Streets of Rage. All these like beat 'em up video games were like all of the setting, the different characters that are like totally mismatched, totally influenced by this.
Final Fight I definitely remember as one, and then Street Fighter. I mean, so this movie's definitely earned its righteous place in pop history, Josh, pop cultural history.
Yeah, I think so. It's certainly an influential film. And I was thinking too, I'm sort of surprised that this movie has never become a stage musical, because it seems like exactly the kind of thing that some Broadway producer would want to adapt, someone who saw it when they were a kid and has held on to it. And Jim Steinman certainly is somebody who could really write the hell out of some extra songs for this, I would say.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Hey, Josh, you know what I thought was interesting, obviously, as a Springsteen guy, with this song, being named after the song? Take a guess how many movies are named after Springsteen songs.
I'm going to guess it's a lot. I don't know, 20 maybe?
No, that's way too much. I got up to like eight, and then there were like 2 or 3 that were like inspired by, like, hey, this movie's based on a Springsteen song. But that's pretty good, to have. And then Thunder Road was a song he wrote based on the old Robert Mitchum movie, The Ballad of Thunder Road. And then they made a movie, Thunder Road, based on the song Thunder Road. So he's really, a media darling. I think he's going to do all right for himself.
Yeah, there's Jungle Land, which is another movie that just came out that's named after a Springsteen song. And that, weirdly enough, this is a super tangent, but I think that kind of relates to the situation they had here, where they named the movie after the Springsteen song, and you think, and they tried to get that song to play at the end of the movie, and then it doesn't happen. And in Jungle Land, it's named after that song, and you think they're going to play that song at the end of the movie in the big climax. And then they play a different Springsteen song instead, possibly because they couldn't get the rights to Jungle Land. I don't know how that worked.
Yeah, and Jungle Land actually thematically fits in with this movie, with Streets of Fire, and also the kind of bombacity and orchestral and theatrical cinematic quality. Might have been a really good song for this one right here, which is interesting. But I thought, there's Streets of Fire, Jungle Land, Thunder Road, Blinded by the Light, which is probably the best of the bunch. Sadly, Kevin Smith's Jersey Girl, which is first a Tom Waits song, but Springsteen popularized it. The Indian Runner, which is based on Highway Patrolman, I think, Sean Penn's movie. And then, Josh, the 2 that you really love, Ed Burns' She's the One, and No Looking Back, which is based on Don't Look Back. And that's important stuff.
Man, it's been too long since Ed Burns was brought up on this podcast. He was such a running theme in our early days, and I'm glad we can bring it back.
She's the One is a good movie.
I don't think I've seen that.
Well,
I think we've been going through these actors, and I think we have to, again, give some more credit to Diane Lane, who was sort of trashed by a lot of critics for this film. But Diane Lane is amazing, and she's had an awesome career, and she's very versatile. She still works in a lot of really good movies, giving really good performances. I just saw her in that Kevin Costner thriller, Let Him Go, and she's excellent in that. But she was really good at playing a rock star. This was the second time she'd done that in like 2 years, after Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains, which is another kind of underground cult type of movie. So I just, credit to Diane Lane.
Josh, when it comes to the 80s, Diane Lane, Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. She knew all about it.
Okay. I didn't know where you were going with that, but
I didn't really.
I was expecting a pun of some kind, and it just
no. She encapsulated that young energy of all the possibilities out there in the 80s.
She did,
and Ellen Aim and the Attackers. They brought it to life for us.
They did indeed. So, anything else you want to mention on the legacy of this film, Jason?
Watch the movie. It's awesome. So
it's a fun movie to watch. And this is obviously not the time to get large groups of people together. But if you happen to have people in your household, gather them all together to watch Streets of Fire.
Maybe, look, we're not telling you to have people over for the holidays. You shouldn't, but you're going to anyway. So get the kids, sit them down, watch Streets of Fire.
You know what we should do is we should organize a drive-in Streets of Fire awesome movie or screening.
Yeah, make that happen, Dave.
Dave, make it happen.
I'm on it. I'm on it.
This would be a great movie to see at the drive-in.
I know.
Yeah.
And they've been showing, theaters in general are showing lots of older films because that's all that's available right now. I would love to see this at the drive-in.
Yeah. Now, Dave, are you going to do that before or after you get us in touch with Martin Brest from Beverly Hills Cop, which was...
I have a busy week ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dave's to-do list is quite long.
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
Am I the only one who wants to go as one of these characters for Halloween? Because I think that would be super fun also.
Which character are you going to dress
I think I'd
as?
probably do Ellen Aim. That would be the most fun of the bunch, right?
Yeah, you're not gonna wear the vinyl overalls or whatever, the Willem Dafoe outfit.
The chafing alone is going to put me away from that one. And, McCoy, they'd just be like, hey, Indiana Jones, where's your hat?
Yeah.
So it's like, Ellen Aim's the way to go.
All right. Well, I look
Yeah.
forward to seeing that next Halloween.
All right.
So that's Streets of Fire, and that's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can follow us on social media.
We're all over social media, Josh, on many platforms.
So
For
many.
instance, we have a website. It's called awesomemovieyear.com. But if that's not enough for you, we have a Facebook platform. And guess what? We have yet to be debunked for putting out fake news on it. And it's at Awesome Movie Year, and at our Instagram's at Awesome Movie Year. Our Twitter's at Awesome Movie Pod because we keep things spicy, Josh. I'm at Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Instagram. Jason J Harris Comedy, not Jason J, just J Harris Comedy on Twitter. And go for jason.com, a website that was not appreciated in its time, nor will it be at any other time.
I am at joshbellhateseverything.com, which I have some plans to add some stuff to coming up. So look for that. Also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And you can check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
You can check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And Dave, you got some cool stuff on the By David Rosen Patreon, right? Isn't some of your new music is there as well?
Sure. Yep. I've got these album length commentaries that are going up about all my albums, as well as some bonus music. And then, of course, the Awesome Movie Year and Piecing It Together content as well.
And speaking of Dave's music, can I just tell you how delighted I was when I listened to the Awesome Movie Year episode on Beverly Hills Cop and heard the Jason H theme song, which is also on the Patreon. And I'll put it up on some of the other platforms. But Dave, you really nailed that theme song. It's awesome.
Thank you, Jason. I'm glad you liked it.
I agree. It's quite amazing. And just Dave, great. Just in general. Shout out to Dave.
Thanks, guys.
So Jason, what's in our next episode?
Josh, next episode, we are covering the Palme d'Or winner of 1984 from the Cannes Film Festival, Wim Wenders Paris, Texas.
So tune in next time for Paris, Texas, and thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.